You've probably driven past a row of trucks at a highway interchange and never given the shape a second thought. Long pointed hoods, big chrome grills, the nose stretches 4, 5, 6 feet ahead of the windshield. American trucks. That's just what trucks look like. But pull up almost any photo of a highway in Germany, France, or the Netherlands and look closely. The hoods are gone. Flat front. Windshield right above the bumper. The driver sits on top of the engine. European trucks. 2 regions, same job, same cargo, same diesel, opposite shapes. Why? The easy answer is, it's just tradition. That's the answer almost everyone gives. But the real answer involves a single American law signed in 1982, a 16.5-meter European rule that turns every centimeter of cab into a centimeter you can't sell, and a 4-foot wall of cast iron that decides whether a driver walks away from a head-on collision at 65 miles an hour. The answer even connects to something sitting in your kitchen and the Amazon box on your porch without you ever realizing it. But let's start with what everyone gets wrong. The first thing people say is, it is the laws. European laws limit truck length, American laws do not. And that is true, sort of. And it is the answer that gets you 60% of the way there and leaves you stranded. Here is how the European side actually works. Under European Union rules, an articulated truck, tractor plus semi-trailer is capped at 16.5 meters total. That is roughly 54 feet, measured from the very tip of the front bumper to the back doors of the trailer. Every centimeter is counted. Every centimeter of cab is a centimeter that is not carrying cargo. So if you are a European fleet operator, the math is brutal. A flat nose is not a style choice. It is the difference between fitting a full pallet or losing that pallet on every single run for the life of the truck. Multiply that across thousands of trips a year, and the long hood American design is not aesthetic to a European operator. It is bankruptcy. So they design what the law forces: cab over engine, driver above the motor, maximum cargo behind it. That is the answer, right? But here's what that explanation completely misses. American trucks didn't always look the way they do now. Go back to 1975. Walk into any truck stop between Chicago and Los Angeles. Every single tractor parked there had a flat nose. The Kenworth K100, the Peterbilt 352, the Freightliner FLA. American long-haul fleets in the 1970s ran cabovers, exactly like the European trucks on a German autobahn today. Same flat face, same reason. American states. Back then enforced overall combination length limits, typically 65 feet, cab included. So the question isn't really why European trucks have flat noses. It is why American trucks stopped having them. And then something specific happened in the United States that changed the entire shape of an entire industry. The event was a single piece of federal legislation. The Surface Transportation Assistance Act was signed by President Reagan in early 1983, after passing in the final days of 1982. Trucking professionals call it STAA, and what it did to American truck design is hard to overstate. Before the STAA, every state set its own length limits, and most counted the entire truck, cab, and trailer against an overall cap, usually 65 feet. A long hood tractor was a direct cargo penalty in every state. The STAA changed the rule. It established a federal floor. States could no longer impose overall length limits on tractor-semi-trailer combinations on interstate highways. They had to allow at least a 48-foot semi-trailer, regardless of how long the tractor was. The KAB stopped counting. Overnight, the math reversed. A long hood tractor was no longer a cargo penalty. It was just a longer truck. American manufacturers pivoted within a decade. By the late 1990s, the cabover was disappearing from American long-haul fleets. By 2006, Freightliner ended Argosy production for the U.S., the last major flat-nosed tractor sold new in North America for highway use. But the law alone does not explain why American manufacturers chose to grow the nose so dramatically once they were free to. That is where the second reason kicks in. A long hood is a crumple zone. 4 to 6 feet of engine block, frame rails, and structural steel sit between the driver's body and a frontal impact. In a head-on collision at highway speed, that mass absorbs energy before the cab itself starts deforming. The driver gets time. Milliseconds, but time. A cab over gives the driver none of that. The driver sits above the front axle, with feet over the bumper line. The cab itself is the front of the truck. There is no crumple zone. There is only cab, which is exactly why European manufacturers had to engineer their cabs into something closer to survival cages. Every European tractor sold for highway use is tested under a UN regulation called ECER 29, including pendulum impacts, roof crush tests, and rear wall tests. American regulators have never adopted an equivalent heavy truck standard. American trucks did not need one. They had the engine doing that job. And this design choice is why the cheese in your refrigerator crossed an ocean in a steel box that was exactly the right size. But we will come back to that. First, the question that breaks the easy story. How did America ever get to a 65-foot rule in the first place? The 65-foot rule did not fall out of the sky. It came out of the road network itself. Until the 1950s, long-haul trucking in America barely existed in the form we know now. 2-lane state highways, towns every 50 miles. Trucks ran short and medium routes, and rail did the long stuff. Then, in 1956, President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act and authorized the interstate highway system, 41,000 miles of high-speed, limited-access road connecting every major American city without a stoplight in between. Suddenly, a driver could go from Chicago to Los Angeles without stopping. Multi-day runs became normal. Sleeper cabs started showing up in the 1960s to handle those new routes. But the state-length laws had not caught up. State after state had inherited a 65-foot overall combination limit from an era when trucks were short and trailers were small. Those limits stayed on the books even as the routes lengthened, and the sleeper cabs ate up tractor length. So manufacturers did the only thing the math allowed. They flattened the nose. By the late 1970s, the American highway truck was, in shape, indistinguishable from a European one. Then, in 1982, the Surface Transportation Assistance Act passed, and the cab stopped counting toward overall length. The cab over died in America, not because it was a bad truck, but because the regulatory math that created it was gone. Meanwhile, in Europe, nothing similar ever happened. The total length cap stayed. The streets stayed narrow. Cities built before the invention of the wheel cart kept their medieval geometry. Roundabouts at every junction. Loading docks were designed in 1952. The flat-nose Volvo, Scania, MAN, and Mercedes-Benz Actros you see on the Autobahn today are not relics. They are the natural endpoint of a road network that never demanded a continental open highway run the same way. Therefore, the design split you are looking at is not really about trucks. It is about which road network came first, and it shapes nearly every single product you have ever bought. Here is where the system you have never thought about quietly takes over your life. The 40-foot shipping container, standardized under an international rule called ISO 668, is the single most important shape in global trade. Every product manufactured in Asia and sold in Europe or America moves inside one, and the length was not chosen by accident. A 40-foot container mounted on a chassis behind a flat-nose European tractor comes out to almost exactly 16.5 meters. That is the exact European Union legal maximum, not coincidence. Engineering. The cab, chassis, container, and law are one interlocking math problem with one solution. Now look at North America. The Surface Transportation Assistance Act freed trailer length, and within a few years the 53-foot domestic trailer became standard, longer than any European trailer, only legal because the cab had stopped counting. That means the orange in your kitchen this January came off a ship in a 40-foot ISO 668 container, transferred to a flat-nosed tractor in Rotterdam, then crossed onto a long-hood American tractor in a 53-foot domestic trailer somewhere in New Jersey. Same orange. 3 different cab shapes along the way. The Amazon box on your porch, the phone in your hand, the IKEA furniture in your living room, assembled in Poland, containerized by a flat-nosed Volvo, shipped, then dragged across America by a long-hood Peterbilt. And here's the part happening right now that almost nobody has noticed. Since 2015, an EU directive amendment has allowed longer, more aerodynamic noses for fuel efficiency and for cyclist safety in cities like London. The new Mercedes-Benz Actros, the Volvo FH Aero, and the latest DAF XG push the cab forward into shapes that would have been illegal 20 years ago. The two systems are slowly drifting back together. So here's where you actually land. You looked at an American long hood and a European flat face and assumed it was style, tradition, cultural taste. What you were actually looking at was a 1982 federal law that erased the cab from the length tape, a 16.5-meter European rule that turned every centimeter of nose into a centimeter of lost cargo, a 4-foot crumple zone of cast iron that decides who walks away from a frontal collision at highway speed, an interstate highway system that made multi-day runs possible in one country and never quite emerged in the other, an ISO container standard that mathematically locks each region's cab to its trailer to its law, and a slow regulatory drift in Europe that is right now beginning to undo the difference. You are not just looking at 2 truck shapes, you are looking at 2 road networks, 2 legal systems, 2 centuries of urban geometry, and 2 industrial pivots, all collapsed into the silhouette of a vehicle you have passed 1,000 times without seeing. And if you think the trucks are strange, wait until we get into why every single shipping container on Earth is exactly the same size.